Okay. Hi. I'd like to welcome all of you here to the event with Samuel Delany, Chip Delany. My name is Mark Inchoco. I am a librarian trainee here, also a composer and conductor, and former Chip student. I'd like to thank Chip for coming, all of you for coming, the administration, Susan Conway, department head, Perry Genovese, Leanne Fallon, Jane Lippman, and especially our library assistant, Carol Arizian, who really helped out finding some of the materials that we will discuss today. I will say that part of, I was Chip's student at Temple University as an undergrad back in 2009, so he's known me since I was a teenager, almost 2 or 3 decades at this point. The subject of today's talk is his sort of life in music. And it's not something that's often known about him, especially with regards to his writing. And the idea for this talk actually happened back in 2010 when I was still an undergrad. I had an office next to Chip back at Temple. And I was very lucky and spoiled because I didn't have to share this office, unlike the graduate students. And I get there early and try to do writing. But then early in the morning, I hear this person singing, like 8 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't even in English, it was in Spanish. It was called Eres Tú by Mochedades. It goes, como la agua, whatever, como una promesa eres tú. And so I'm like, who the hell is singing this in the morning? And then I peep in, I was like, oh, it's Chip. I didn't know he was musical. So we'll talk about that, and it's quite a lovely sort of history and career. So I'd like to welcome Chip. Give us an applause for him, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage.
Familiar and unfamiliar faces both. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. So you had some things you wanted to read. Did you want to do that first?
Well, I'll start. This is Mark said we were going to talk about music and the part it played in my life. Most of that is from fairly early in my life, or at least, one familiar face there. And it's, I did not know for the longest time whether I was going to be a writer or a performer of some sort. I at one point had a fairly decent singing voice, not anymore. The music in my family was something that was just generally a large part of it. One of my earliest memories is going to my aunt's house in Montclair, New Jersey, when I was about 3 or 4, and looking through and watching my older cousin Boyd Savoy take violin lessons in the other room. And they basically, there was one room, and I was not supposed to go. I was not even supposed to look in it while he was taking violin lessons, but I did anyway. Eventually, when Boyd went to college, he gave up the violin, and I always said I was sort of interested in. So my aunt gave me Boyd's violin because he was sort of through with it. He was then going to, I believe it was Bard. But when this happened, um, uh, one of the things in elementary school, I'm getting ahead of my story. My father was always known as a guy who could get music out of any instrument. And, you handed him a silver flute and he could tootle away on it. You handed him a shaum and he could get some music out of it. And his own instrument was the cornet, of all things. And he actually, when he was very young, when he was 17 or so, he sat in with Cab Calloway at the Cotton Club. We always had on the desk in my parents' bedroom this photograph that was from Lady Constance to Sam and Margaret. And, eventually I said, who was Lady Constance? Well, Lady Constance was Cab's wife. And for those of you who don't know, Cab's birthday was on Christmas Day. And at that time, if you were black, you couldn't go into the Cotton Club unless you were a performer. They did not allow, so anyway, my father, Cab would have all the people, he would have a Christmas birthday party, and he had had his cellar redecorated so that, and he was pretty well off at that particular time. So he had his cellar was decorated as a reproduction of the Cotton Club. And on Christmas Day, people would come. Is this not doing what it? That's probably better. Okay, thank you. At any rate, so people would come in, and he would also, and he'd have people there also performing. And so, if you wanted to go you had to be, go to Cab's birthday to see what was going on at the Cotton Club, if you were actually black. And my parents always went there. And as I said, my father actually played with him I don't know, once or twice when he was about 17. At any rate, but because my father had this sort of reputation that he could do anything musical, which is probably true, I don't know. He, like so many people, he at that time, he was very, very concerned about security and what have you, and he was talented both. He could do drawings, and he also drew well, and he also always wanted to paint. And he never got to it until he was literally dying of cancer. And he managed to start doing these incredibly geometric drawings of what was out the window, which was anyway, I'm getting away from the story of the music, forgive me. But he decided he was going to teach me to play the violin by getting some books on the violin and sort of keeping a chapter ahead of me, and what have you. So he got them, and he began doing this, and he began teaching me, trying to teach me. The one thing my father could not do was teach. He could, he just didn't know how, he was the world's worst teacher, and I'm surprised, I'm surprised that either of us were still alive at the end of these things. But anyway, but he started to do this, and but I went in, and I remember at Dalton, there was a woman who used to give violin lessons, and her name was Mrs. Wallace. And there was another student named Jonathan Pouliere who took violin lessons with Mrs. Wallace, and I remember her, teaching Jonathan, and so she called my mother and father in, And she said, well, you really have to have a teacher who knows what they're doing with violin, because there's just too much to it that is counterintuitive, but at the same time, but if you don't do it right, you're never going to get anywhere. So I eventually ended up, however, in the Dalton School Elementary School Orchestra. And I was sitting I sat next to Tony. I was a year behind Tony Hiss, but we were both at the same level in terms of our musical things. So we were like the two second chair violins in the Dalton Orchestra. Okay, so eventually I did go to Mrs. Wallace, and she called my parents in and told them they really need real lessons. So that's what they did, and as I said, it didn't. And so I ended up taking real violin lessons, and it was, that was, and yes, there was. So I actually learned a little bit of violin, and everything was going fine. But I was then started at a new summer camp, Camp Woodland. Now, Camp Woodland is probably one of the reasons I'm alive and a human being today. It just was a very wonderful place with a fairly laissez-faire attitude toward the students. They believed in things like that the students should run the camp if possible. And then what would happen is we would want to run it one particular day, and we would we'd go see Norman Studer, who was the head, and we explained, and he said, well, that's the one thing you can't do. We had a big kerfuffle over whether there was going to be social dancing, or there was one day a week where there was social dancing, and then there were other days a week where there were square dancing and things like that. And everybody loved the square dancing, and you could wear anything you wanted to that. But the social dancing, the girls had to wear skirts, and the boys had to wear pants. And I remember that we had a lovely, very smart young woman named Serena Rochelle, and she explained. She said, those of us who already know about that sort of thing, it's fine. But for the other people, there are a lot of girls that this is just hell. Getting themselves all dolled up. It's just not what we do. It was a camp where everybody ran around in blue jeans, and So anyway, so there we are. So that was the Cotton Glove, and also my summer camp. My second summer at Camp Woodland, one of the wonders of the camp music of the camp music program was that for 2 weeks every summer, Norman Studer would invite Pete Seeger to come and just be a guest of the camp, and he would teach all of us, songs, and there would be a couple of performances where he would perform for the whole camp, and that was just wonderful. As far as I was concerned, when I grew up, I was going to be a folk singer, so he was not a counselor. He was not a counselor. He was just a guest at the camp. But having him there, and he would usually give at least one performance of the in the amphitheater behind the rec hall, and otherwise he would and that was sort of amazing. I can remember once. I went to the camp for 5 years, And I remember, probably it was in my second or third year, I went to New York. I lived in New York, and somewhere down in the Greenwich Village, there was a show playing called "Take a Giant Step," and there's a film made of it, but the show was much better than the film. And I remember going there and seeing it. And as I was coming out of the door, who should be coming out of the door as well but Pete Seeger, who looked down at me and said, "Oh, Chip, hi, how are you?" And that was it. I was going to be a folk singer. And so, he used to do hootenannies at the Pythian Theater in Brooklyn, and I went to one of those and got to sit on the stage with him, and just wonderful.
What's a hootenanny?
Huh?
What is a hootenanny?
What is a hootenanny? Oh, well.
For us young.
Let me see. How many people don't know what a hootenanny is? Not that many. Okay. Well, it's a place where a whole bunch of musicians get together and they all sing, and and it can be led by one person, or it can be led by lots of people can do it, and that there you go. When I was a kid, when I was about 16 or 17, I had my first music group, and it was called the Harbor Singers, and we would go and play at a little coffee shop somewhere in the far West Village. I don't even know where it is today. I couldn't find it today, but I remember going there and finding it, and we would rehearse, and it was, so there we were. When I was at in Dalton School, one of the people, as I said, the kid who sat next to me, his name was Tony Hiss. His father was Alger Hiss, which is a name some of you might know, and who got into a fair amount of trouble, he swore up and down that he was innocent of the thing till his death, And I don't know. I was close enough to him, and Tony, believe that I was in a circle of people who felt that he was, that he had been railroaded. So whether there's no way to, it would to hold on to a lie that long, however, is a rough thing on everybody. But at any rate, Tony, his father's apartment was on 8th Street, just in front of Irving Place. And when you looked out the window, you looked at something called the Cedar Street Tavern, which was a fairly well-known tavern, although it had originally been in Cedar Street, which is somewhere way downtown in the village, and then it had moved uptown. And it was quite a. It was. I remember I used to go there when I was 15, or 14 or 15, and I would go in and I would get a glass of beer, because they just didn't card anybody. So I began my career as a lush drunk.
Now, were you singing, or were you playing were you singing in these groups?
Pardon me?
Were you the singer in the group? Were you the singer in the group? What were you doing in the group?
I'm sorry.
What was your role in your music groups?
I was the arranger and the and I was Okay, I don't know whether this is at all relevant to anything, which is unfortunately the way we call it mind works. But one of the things that people told me all through my childhood, is, well, when you grow up, your voice is going to crack, and you're going to get to puberty, and your voice is going to, and do all of these things that it's supposed to. Mine never did. My voice, I was a boy soprano. I slid effortlessly from soprano to tenor, to tenor, and then to a sort of baritone. And that was it. And I kept waiting. I used to pretend that my voice was cracking so that I sounded like other people, and it, but my voice didn't crack. And I was in the choir at St. Philip's Church on 132nd Street in New York, and I was an altar boy. 3 years later, I was an atheist. I think one of the wonderful things that happened in St. Philip's Church, and I didn't hear about this until very much later, is that it was the play Gertrude Stein's 4 Saints and 3 Acts. Right. Did all its rehearsals in the same basement where I went every Saturday, and Wednesdays for choir rehearsal with Mr. Witherspoon, who was the head of our choir. Nobody ever mentioned that, 15 years before, this really important cultural aspect of modernism had just occurred right there in my church. If they had, I probably would have had, because I was reading Gertrude Stein when I was 17. I read I read 2 of her books then. The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which was a life-changing book for me, and also Lectures in America, which was also a life-changing book for me. One of the things that happens in the Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. I don't know, is this a book that many of you have read? Yeah, so, okay. But basically, what it is, it's Gertrude Stein wanted Alice to write her autobiography, and Alice never got around to it. So finally, Gertrude said, well, I'll write it for you. And so she wrote this thing called the Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, as though Alice B. Toklas had writing all about Gertrude Stein. But one of the things that was there, and it really was a big change for me. At one point, she is talking to a young, then 19-year-old composer, and writer named Paul Bowles.
Sure.
And she said to him, Paul, if you don't work hard when you're 20, no one will love you when you're 30. And
I was going to say, I suppose no one loves
that,
me.
and I read that when I was 70. I said, I better get started working hard now. I'm not as talented as all these people. I better just get started. And so I did. And rather famously, I published my first novel when I was 19, and that's entirely due to Gertrude Stein. Entirely due to Gertrude Stein. Yeah, I still keep the book, and every once in a while I read it again, and there's lots and lots of things. It also starts with Alice B. Toklas writing a letter to Henry James, and he answered it. And that's something that just, I didn't know that the people you read about, like Henry James or what have you, were real. I thought they were just, you know, and it also taught me that there were, you know, literature was made by people. You know, it was not just, you know, it was not all Shakespeare or people who were, who'd been dead for 35 years or 400 years, as the case may be, but even the people who had been dead for years and years and years were at one point real people who, liked one another or disliked one another or what have you, and had these real relations, and went to dinner with one person, went to dinner with what have you, and it suddenly, and I think this is an important lesson for that all writers have to learn, and the younger you learn it, the better, is that it's done by real people. It's not just, So anyway, there I was, benefiting wonderfully from Gertrude Stein, and she has said, in the Lectures in America, she says something like two-thirds of English literature is descriptions of the daily island life. And she says things like, the paragraph is the emotional unit of the English language. I now know what a paragraph is, and
It's not 5 sentences.
And I spent a lot of time describing the daily island life, if I happen to be writing about an island. Yeah, and often I am, right. Even if I put it in the middle of the country. Right. Yeah. So this is Miss Stein, yeah. And her. I really do think Gertrude Stein was the most important critic we produced, at least in my little, I think she's the great critic. I still have a lot of Gertrude Stein books, and Wars I Have Seen, and things like, and a lot of it is very different. A lot of it is in Steinese, but a lot of it isn't, And so there you go. And she also wrote letters to, she has a whole huge, thick book of letters with Thornton Wilder. Now, Thornton Wilder was a playwright who wrote Our Town, which is something of a experimental play, and also The Skin of Our Teeth, which is my favorite play by him, and also The Merchant of Yonkers. And since I had aunts who lived in Yonkers at the time, they're talking about a place I know. And so anyway, all of this stuff is, what has this got to do with music? Well, as I said, I got my cousin's violin. Eventually, Aunt Virginia sent me the upright piano that was up in the 3rd floor, and so suddenly I had 2 musical instruments in my, there was the violin, and then there was this upright piano that was stuck in my tiny little room. But it wasn't upright. It was, it didn't take up a lot of room. But I had my own piano. So what did I do? I started writing music. And that's, what would you say? Okay. At Woodland, we did a lot of singing. We sang a cantata every year for the parents, and we put this whole together. And there was
Halfrecht.
Huh?
Halfrecht.
Well, Herbert Halfrich was one. Then Robert de Cormier was another, and there also there was a lot of the music of Earl Robinson, Ballad for Americans, the Lonesome Train, which is his cantata, a piece of work about Abraham Lincoln's death and the train going around the country. One of the things that it made me feel that my country was America. I never wanted to live any place. You know, I wanted to visit other places. I wanted to, to go, and I wanted to spend, and I wanted to do it intelligently. I mean, I actually spent 6 months traveling over into Greece and what have you. And what did I do when I was in Greece? I played the guitar, and I sang and I played the backup guitar for a young woman who used to sing and I played better guitar than she, which was nice. And they also, and I wrote some songs and all sorts of things like that. But again, I started out. I wanted to write, but I also wanted to do everything. I figured when I grew up, I was going to be a psychiatrist and a nuclear physicist, and and a novelist, and what have you. One by one, they all fell away, and I was quite sure that it was the music that was going to take over, because, as I said, this wonderful musician had said hello to me when I left the theater and knew my name was Pete Seeger. So anyway,
Let me ask you.
Yes,
So when you were a kid, and you had your piano and your violin, you mentioned that you composed music.
yeah.
Now, what kind of music did you compose?
Well, I composed. I had friends who played. By that time, I had friends who played music. I had gone to another summer camp called Camp Rising Sun. It was the first year after, which, incidentally, I found out that Pete Seeger had gone to. And he had not liked it, and neither did I. It was nowhere near as interesting, and you were nowhere near as involved with the community as you were at Camp Woodland. They had it was when I went there, it was an all-boys camp, which was weird. That was just weird. I still remember Serena Rochelle's marching up to Norman and saying, "Hey, you can't make us all wear, you can't make us all wear." She was the one who looked good in the dresses and what have you, and did it very easily. And she said, in fact, she said, "For me, it's easy, but it's nightmare for all the other, girls, because they say that's not what they wear during the day." As I said, and we're told, no.
So the music that you composed.
Okay, the music, okay, well, very early, at one point, my father had taught me how to, notate music. And then, of course, Miss Wallace had, the circle of fists and the circle of fists for the flats
The sharps.
Sharps and the circle of fourths for the
flats.
flats, and all of these things, and and plus the fact that the brasses are notated a whole step differently from everything else, and so all of which was fun. And I got and someone said something about Berlioz had orchestrated on the guitar. So I got this. Oh, and then there's something called labanitation.
Oh, it said that's a dancing.
Yes, yeah. I got a book on labanitation, and I was learning how to write down dance movements and things like that. I was quite convinced that while I was at it, I was also going to be a dancer. Because I wanted to. I even tried out for Donnie McKeil's dance troupe. How do you say this? I was choreographing dances at our local community center, not for Morningside Gardens where we had just lived, but for the General Grant houses across the way. And there was this wonderful woman named Margaret Friedlander, who was a dancer herself, and as soon as I said I would like to choreograph a couple of dances, fine. The next thing I knew, I had dancers. I was the only boy in the group, so I just made sure it starred me. At any rate, but it was fun. It was a great deal of fun. And I did write I met a friend I went to Croton on the Hudson, and I met a young violinist there named Peter Saloff, and so I decided to write a violin concerto for him. And I tried, and the score is somewhere in my archive, I never. What happened is I dedicated a book to him, and he, which he never. I don't think he ever saw, and I also spelled his name wrong, which is me. One of the things you probably all know, I am hopelessly dyslexic, and have been. And it means I have to work harder. That's all, and it means I have to retype everything. One of my favorite writers that became into my ken very early was Theodore Sturgeon. And Sturgeon, he actually wrote all those 220-some short stories. They were typed out first draft. How he did that, I do not know. I have to type out everything at least 5 times, So, and I kind of thought, well, he must be lying, But we had a little correspondence. He said, no, I really do them, and so that, but he did. How that was amazing for me.
So you wrote. It said that you wrote atonal music as a child.
Then there's the atonal music.
So you had this melange of Pete Seeger, hootenannies.
Yeah, well,
then on the other side of you, you had Hector Berlioz, Richard Wagner, and the Second Viennese School. So how did that come into your life?
Yeah, sideways.
Yeah.
Let me see. Well, where I've lost kind of my train of thought. I've lost my train wreck of thought. Okay. Well, one of the things that happened is I got a job when I was 15 at the St. Agnes branch of the New York Public Library, which ended up being directly across the street from where 20 years later, from where I ended up living. And one of the things that happened is in the basement, I found that's the libretto, and then the score. Do we have this? Okay, I found probably an elegant. This is this is the musical score. You see, it looks like a musical score. That's how it's got all these notes with, sharps, flats, and rests. But it also had the libretto. This is just the libretto separately, but it was all in one book. And I sat there and I read it entirely through, and I could, and I could more or less hear the music at that time. I can't anymore, but I could more or less hear the music from reading it, and one of the things that I remember is that's really quite interesting in it is that in the libretto of the Rake's Progress there is a character called Baba the Turk.
And this is an opera by which composer?
Oh, it's a opera by Igor Stravinsky, with a libretto by W.H. Auden and Chester Kalman. Eventually, I was to have Auden and Kalman over to dinner when I was 19, and that's talked about in a book of mine called The Motion of Light and Water, and it was on February 8th. I got the date out, so as I figured somebody might want to know what was the day they came over to dinner. And so, it worked. It was a very lovely evening. One of the things that's interesting is that you read descriptions of Auden from that time, and they say that he that he tended to dominate all the conversations he took part in, and that he was difficult to deal with. He said, "That's not what they did when they came over." My wife was a poet. Her name was Marilyn Hacker, and she's still up at that point. And we were friendly. We are still friendly. We have a child in common, because I was always trying to get people to pay attention to her poetry, and so I thought it would be nice I had a friend named Johnny Cronenberger in Dalton. He's the only person from my elementary school who came to our wedding party, which is interesting. But his father was Louis Cronenberger, and they had done Louis Cronenberger had done an anthology of aphorisms with W.H. Auden, and apparently Johnny said that apparently on several occasions Auden would come and babysit for him and Liza. That's Dalton for you. Everybody seemed to know everybody, and I remember Johnny going along and telling about the Chester's imitations of Diana Trilling. That got everybody laughing at the last, Christmas party they had, or so what have you. But anyway, he also, I was still in touch with Johnny, and I said, "Well, would you have Auden's address?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And he got the address, and it was 74 St. Mark's Place. I will never forget it. And so what I did, one of the things I did is I took some of Marilyn's poems, and I went over there and I called myself going at a reasonable hour, 10 o'clock in the morning. And I read, and I rang the bell. And there was indeed Allman and Kalman and Auden, and I rang the bell, and this man in a blue kimono got at the head of there and said, "For God's sakes, it's the middle of the night. What do you?" And I said, "Well, could you give this to Mr. Auden?" And so he did. And sure enough, a little while, there was a call, from Auden, who said he would like to see Marilyn Hacker and look at her poems. So he did. And she went over there, and she wrote some poems about it. And then the next thing you know, we invited them. I said we were painting the apartment when this was going on, and I said, invite him to dinner. So eventually, as I said, he eventually came over on February 8th, and it's described in great detail. And what we talked about, and all of that's in the motion of light and water.
So there's only a few more minutes until we get to question time, but
Sure.
I really want you to tell a story about Bob Dylan.
Okay, all right. Okay, when you want me to? Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, well.
How you open for Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
This is true.
It's not. Well, what it is the people who lived upstairs from us, Billy and Terry. Billy was a relative of mine somehow through a woman named Virginia Murphy, who's a cousin of mine, and there was an interracial marriage, and Terry was an Italian kid from upstate New York, and she was sort of a hefty young woman, and anyway, they. Now, let me see. Oh, they were running they somehow got to run a cafe, a little coffee shop.
Elysee or something.
What? The Cafe Elysee.
Yeah.
Which was on Bleecker Street,
Yeah.
just off Bleecker Street, and I'm. And I'm going down there, and they've asked me to come down and play my guitar and sing and do singing, and so so I went down, and I'm sitting there, and apparently somebody, Bob Dylan, had been in earlier. I didn't see. And had wanted to go on, but he'd gotten and wanted to go on, and and Terry had pasted my novel. My first two novels have come out, and so the most recent one had its name changed to what should have been Out of the Dead City. That's what it had been, but they decided it was now Captives of the Flame. She on the sandwich board sign, she had sort of scotch taped this thing. Singing tonight, the author of Captives of the Flame. So there it was, and apparently, when Dylan had come by, they had decided. I was there, and I was the first to go on, and and so outside was a sandwich board. Singing tonight was, and then Dylan had had come on, and when I got there that night, he had apparently been in and asked, could he go on? He was going to, and it was also, and underneath it said, and Bob Dylan. And then about 10 minutes later, apparently he got another job at the Bitter End or something, which is another coffee shop, and which was a much better place. So he and so he came running in and said, "Well, I got to go on first. I've got to go on." And Ed and Billy said, "No, you're not going on first. Chip is singing now. You're not going to stop." And he said, "Well, I can't. Then I can't go on." And so he turned around and ran out. And that was and sang up the other one, which was a much better place. But for about 45 minutes, my name was above a future Nobel Prize winner for literature.
And with that said, if any questions in the
Yeah,
audience,
let's open this up to something more.
just raise your hand. There's one back there on the left.
Thanks. I've read only a small selection of your writing, but you've written a lot about theories of literature and of genre and this idea of paraliterature involving kind of what other people might call genre fiction or whatever. And I've often wondered whether music, especially lyrical music, things like albums or operas and things like that, can be kind of analyzed as literature, whether they can be interpreted in terms of narrative
You mean
and things
the
like that.
lyrics? The lyrics can certainly be poetry.
But
Many of Shakespeare's songs were actually sung. Some of the music actually survives to some of them, and also there are several versions of almost every song.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think poetry traditionally has often had a relationship with music that is preserved to some extent. But I wonder especially whether, when, for example, Dylan has won like a Nobel Prize for literature or whatever, but his work is rarely encountered as poetry. You wouldn't really read it necessarily. It's much different to hear it with music. And I wonder whether that relationship between words and music can be analyzed as a whole.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, songs. There are. There's the whole literature of art songs or not so or folk music, this is that there is lots and lots and lots of that, and I like some art songs too. I mean, Die Winterreise and
Oh, sure.
and the Schubert cycle. The Earl King?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Earl King.
Huh?
The Earl Koenig.
Earl Koenig, yes, yeah, and then and there is a and what is his name? Ned Rorem.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, who basically wrote music, vocal music for thing. Whom I met at Yaddo, of all places, the one time I went, which was just I think in about 1900, but not just before I came to Temple University. I came
early
basically
2000s.
from Yaddo to Temple, and that was and that was because I had read Ned's Ned. Listen to me. I had read Rorem's New York and Paris diaries many years before that, and they had been a major influence on me, and so I just and then when I actually met him, we used to have one of the things that Yaddo used to do that I thought was great. We would have an evening where the various people there, would give readings, and everybody was. Ned was the one that Ned Rorem was the one that I was, he'd written the New York and Paris diaries, and I had gotten them. They had been originally published by Avon Books, and once when I went up to Avon Books, I was walking along the hall, and I saw a copy of I guess it was the Paris diaries, and so I picked it up, and it was the setting copy for their paperback, and I thought, and they were giving them away. Get them. So I took it home, and I assume it's up in my archive at this point, but one of the things I remember is that we I was just, everybody was in awe of him, you know. And he was, you know, and one of the things, he would listen, and he would listen to the reading, and then he would say, he only had 2 comments. His comments was, I like that, you know, or it doesn't quite talk to me. And that would be it, you know. And sometimes, you know, and I had a very good friend there. I made a very good friend, a woman named Pamela Sneed, a black poet, and she was just in a fit, you know. And I said, well, just, you know, and see what he says, you know. And we both got a, well, I like that. And we were both very, very happy.
Well, on that note, thank you so much,
Okay.
Chip, for spending some time with us and talking about your life in music.
Okay, well, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all.
Now you can check his Facebook for your photograph. Okay. Have a great rest of the day. Stay cool, everybody.
Uh,